Welcome to this Royal Automobile Club podcast brought to you in association with Motorsport from the most fantastic room of trophies, the Seagrave Trophy Room at the Royal Automobile Club. Looking ahead to Le Mans, coming very shortly, but I'm joined by two drivers who are going to be in the thick of the action, Alex Brundle and Mike Conway. And we're going to talk about all things to do with Le Mans. Mike, let's swing round to you first. LMP1, Toyota Gazoo Racing, got to go there. You've been twice second at Le Mans. Can you get the top step this year?
I mean, I hope so. Every year you go there. Just going there with the team that we have, you've got a chance to obviously win. But yeah, it's some say that Le Mans picks you, but you do as much as you can as a driver and as a team to kind of execute. But just sometimes things, small little mishaps, and things with the car can happen. So, as we know, we've seen over the many years that can happen. So, but we'll be pushing as hard as we can for that.
There are so many potential highs and lows at Le Mans. Obviously, Kazuki Nakajima has recovered, but I mean, failing in, we're not talking the 11th hour, we're talking the sort of the 23rd hour and 55 minutes a few years ago. But the team obviously bounced back from that. I mean, it was heartbreak and more. Made fantastic TV, but that's no consolation to Toyota and everyone involved. But it's all about experience, because Le Mans can throw so many curveballs at you, and you have to just have the way you do everything absolutely down to a T. Every procedure that is required when there's an emergency or a safety car or whatever you have to know how to react to that. Yeah, and that's one thing I have to say the team have been really prepared with the last couple of years now, is trying to simulate any kind of problem, whether it be from a puncture to a problem with the hybrid system, brakes, whatever it may be, trying to simulate how effective you can get home without losing, the time, getting home safely, because we know how long a lap Le Mans is, and if you have a puncture at the beginning of the lap, by the time you get home, we saw it, just 2 years ago with my teammate, got a puncture, went a bit too quick, destroyed the bodywork, that ended up destroying some of the hydraulic lines, affected the gearbox, and he ended up being like 250 meters from pit lane entry to getting home. So there's so many ways you can approach things. So yeah, we have done that quite well over the last couple of years now, and yeah, hopefully we don't need to use them, but we're definitely prepared if we need to. But do you find it quite strange that you have to do as much homework ahead of the event as you do? Wind it back to when you were racing single-seaters. You used to just rock up and drive, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we both probably like just still jumping in stuff and going, but yeah, now I think with all the technology there is out there and the amount of preparation, the simulator stuff, the videos that you've watched from years and years before, I think just the better you prepare, the better you'll be when you get there.
Let's hope you're right. Alex, P2, very, very busy class, and United Autosports, late entries, very late indeed. They get to operate out of a tent in the extended pit lane, but you're taking on the regulars. It's going to be difficult.
Absolutely. I mean, it's always a different vibe at Le Mans. You have P2 cars that go and race in Asia and Europe for the full World Endurance Series, and then in America as well, and they all come together. It's almost like a festival. It's like a festival environment of LMP2, and it gets all the more tight, of course, as a result. We are a last-minute entry, but I think the team we're already prepared to deliver a good performance. I don't think that's something that's going to hold us back. And what a story it would be if we were able to convert, two temporary garages and a last-minute entry into a result.
But it's not to say you don't race with. You're going to be racing with Ryan Cullen, who you race with in the European Le Mans Series. So you're not an alien to the car. You're not a stranger to the car. You're not a stranger to Ryan. And Will Owen is joining you as well. So not as regular as all those who compete in the WEC the whole time, but not a complete beginner.
We're keeping our lineup together, and I think it's always good to have continuity. It's something that's really hard to come by in LMP2 actually, because there are just so many LMP2 cars running the whole time, drivers, and there's an element of spec also between the cars, with only a certain number of manufacturers developing a car. So it's relatively easy for drivers to jump between teams. It happens quite a lot. It's really good to have the gang together to go to the 24. And I'm no stranger to Le Mans either. Nice to be back. This will be my sixth time, and I've got to jump from the second step of the podium and get my fingertips on the top one.
Can we just go back 12 months ago at Le Mans, it wasn't the dream ticket for you, Oliver Rowland and Oliver Turvey, running the... They call the Far East the abbreviation of nations, but I mean, you were in the, what was it now, the CEFC TRSM Ginetta, and it spent a lot of time in the garage.
Yeah, a jump into the world of LMP1, and always funding is key. And I think that's what we lacked in terms of that program, just pure time, funding, ability to develop the car. We always knew that was going to be a tough race. Everybody turned up prepared for it to be a tough race. I think it was tougher even than we anticipated it being. But I think these experiences make you stronger. And when you do have a good car and a good team behind you, and in a position where the people around you, the crew around you are capable of winning your class, then you grab it, because those years remind you how scarce and fleeting some of those opportunities can be.
Hasn't put Ginetta off though, has it? Because they're planning to come back in end of August, start of September, when we kick off the next season of the World Endurance Championship at Silverstone, actually competing for one of the trophies up above me, the Tourist Trophy. I mean, these are fantastic trophies. These always used to seem in motor racing, the better the race you won, the more disappointing. It's a bit like sports day at school. You run your heart out to win 400 metres, you get a little trophy and the little badge would fall off before you'd even got off the track. But these are fine trophies to go for.
Incredible bits of silver. What was really interesting always in prototype racing is you really have to look at the positives sometimes, because when everything is not working with these complex cars, you can lose a massive amount of performance through actually some things that are relatively small and easy to fix. So I think everybody went away obviously massively disappointed with that performance. We got one car to the end that year. It wasn't our car, unfortunately, and we didn't have the pace of our competitors in the class. I think everybody acknowledged that. But at the same time, there were elements to take forward, and certainly Ginetta, I tested the car again a little bit later on in that year with a change of power unit. Things took a step forward for that test. I know they've been out testing again, and things will take a step forward again. And that kind of tenacity can only see them back on the grid, I would have thought. And it'd be good to see more prototypes, more LMP1 cars, especially for Mike to race in the next year.
What you alluded to there were two things, but the element of trying to take on Toyota Gazoo Racing. You're in this preeminent position. A few years ago, you had Porsche and Audi as rivals. This year, it's a sort of the rule book that and the adjustment, the balancing of performance, if you will, that seems to be the thing going against you, bringing the other P1 class cars closer. That's what they're trying to do the whole time. So if people don't follow the World Endurance Championship, they'll look down the entry list and go, P1, well, two cars from Toyota Gazoo Racing, they won last year, they've always been quick.
Yeah.
But it's not a foregone conclusion. We've talked about small mistakes can
really
unravel all the good you can do, all the tenths of a second you've saved here or there, they could be
Yeah, I mean, our cars are that bit more complex than the privateers, so we have...
Do you want to touch on that? Because I think if people look at it, they can't tell from looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, it looks very similar to the other privateer cars, but we do have a hybrid system. So we have a battery that sits right next to the driver and a front motor and a rear motor that allows us to boost off the corner, and adding that on top of the normal engine adds up to about 1,000 horsepower. So we don't have that all the time. It's literally on just not every acceleration, but some accelerations, and we recharge on the braking and things like that. So we're limited to 8 megajoules per lap, and that's kind of all we can burn. And we have a less amount of fuel that we can burn per lap than the privateers too. So
if someone, a capable racing driver, was told nothing about the technology of your car, they got in, they accelerated out of the pits at Le Mans, what point would they have a surprise that they didn't understand what was happening?
They'll have a surprise initially just when they switch the car on and there's no noise. And when they pull away, it just pulls away an electric until you get to pit speed, and then the engine fires. So that will be initially weird. It was for me, but even still, pulling away electric, you feel, like it's good power, just very direct torque. So, and then when you leave pit lane, as I said, you get all the horses, galloping away, and it's good power. I mean, four-wheel drive is, amazing acceleration. So, and you can get to, it's the different style of driving too. Like in a rear-wheel drive car, you have to be that little bit later in the apex to get to power, and the rear will, rotate more. But in the four-wheel drive, the front, when you go down for power, it's help turning as well. So you can end up going for power earlier, and you're not worrying about the rear coming around so much. So
as you began to adapt that? Did it take long to sort of be able to find the key bits of performance that you could use?
Yeah, it's all about understanding how, when I first drove the car, they were still learning as well about the hybrid system on the most efficient way to drive, how you apply the brakes, how you're applying the throttle. And then once it became, a kind of an efficiency thing as well with fuel per lap, you could easily start burning too much fuel just with your driving style.
What sort of readouts, what do you have that alerts you to the fact you've been a little bit lead-footed?
I mean, we have the fuel cuts itself before you enter a corner. So if one lap you had one earlier, like 10 meters, you're like, okay, could have been because I had traffic earlier, or did I do something differently in a certain corner? So there's some corners when you're itching to get on throttle, and maybe a little bit is going to help you, balance the car. But you've got to pick your moments where, okay, don't do that. Save that fraction so that I've got a little bit extra at the end of the straight. So it's all that kind of balancing act. But in the end, it makes you think about other cars that you've driven and thinking, okay, I can translate some of that when if I'm in a fuel saving type situation and I've got to drive a bit more efficiently. So yeah, definitely made me a better driver and think about, what I could do extra.
You 2016, 2017 had a bit of Formula E experience. Did any of that help, or was that something, again, completely different?
Yeah, there's some things that will translate over. But yeah, they're strange cars. I'd say 100% really enjoyed the car to drive, because they're not, I wouldn't say particularly quick, but the handling as well, the tyres, they're not super high grip. So, but I can see, it's getting better and better. I mean, it's a strong championship. We see all the manufacturers there. So, and they drive, I'd say, similar to another car. It's not like anything so different, but it's quite interesting not having the noise of the engine, how much enhances other things that gets drowned out, like, tyres screeching under braking. And
did you do the year without gear? Which year did you do? Was it the first?
I did the first car I drove, so we had gears, and then I drove the Dragon car sort of a year ago. It had no gears, so
strange.
Not really. I mean, it feels like a big go-kart when you got no gears, So they are fun. I mean, they're heavy, so they kind of, you're on the limit a lot. Not much downforce to keep you kind of pinned to the ground. So
a lot of brake bias changes for the regen stuff.
Yeah, that's a big thing. When the battery's full and you're switching brake balance massively.
So Alex, sort of listening to the description of the TSO 50 hybrid and the Formula E, what would you want to race? Okay, let's go to where should the World Endurance Championship be going? We know they've been looking at the rule book, looking about bringing in a hypercar class as the senior class. That appears to be in retreat, I think we can say at the moment, because not enough top-line manufacturers have committed to it. They might do it in a few years' time, might not. But as we're looking, where do you think, what should be the top class? What would be the sort of car that you would want to race? And you think young fans in particular would like to watch race in the World Endurance Championship?
I think you're kind of snookered to a degree, because there's a certain speed of lap we start to expect around Le Mans. Now we've seen the, 314s happen, etc., and so any car that's going to go that quick is going to have to be safe enough to go that quick. So it's going to have to be carbon.
Does it have to be that quick on the stopwatch, or could it just look that quick and be 10 seconds slower?
I think the audience would be disappointed with a car that runs much slower. I'm talking about considerably slower. Like if we slowed the whole race now down to GTE speed, I feel like the audience would notice that. I'm sure there are so many opinions flying around on this, but that would be my view. There has to be an element of electrification, because that's the way that road technology is going. So actually, something that's capable of delivering that performance around Le Mans with an element of hybrid snookers you relatively, with the available technologies, snookers you relatively close to what's out there racing right now. The only step that needs to be taken in terms of delivering that in a more sustainable way is cost. So how do you reduce cost? You spec bits, and you remove the barriers to entry. So I guess something very, very similar in terms of performance and delivery to what we have now, but a reduced cost must be the way forward. So that would be the class that I would like to race in.
As the senior class.
As the senior class. And I know I sound like I've described LMP2 there, but I haven't. If you think there's an element
I saw what you were trying to do.
Yeah, there's an element of hybrid to it, and there's an element of manufacturers taking that car and making it their own.
When we look across, when I say the years, the decades, sports car racing has had many, many elements of flux where they have to change the rules. They've decided the field has become a bit meagre. They're going to do something. They've made a rule change. It doesn't necessarily always immediately springboard. You know, people didn't like Group C when it was brought in. It was a fuel formula, et cetera, et cetera. But we have these great years, these fabulous years where they've just got it right. But do you worry that technology in the automotive industry is changing so fast that to plan something that ought to be coming on song, and I mean really coming rich in about 3 years' time, the technology might have moved beyond there? Because one of the things at Le Mans has always been Garage 56. In fact, they're going to have to call it Garage 63 from now on, aren't they? Because they've extended the pit lane. Is the technology car, the technology of the future? We've had talk of hybrid cell cars. I think Porsche are working very hard on one at the moment, and so on. But I mean, the game is changing so quickly. Do you not think that it could be quite a predicament for them making rules?
One of the draws of Le Mans is that the original draws of Le Mans was that the whole field was Garage 56, and that they actually, every single car in the race was experimental in some way, shape or form. I think the race, through its history, is brought the way that we make cars and the way that we race cars forward in a really organic way. I think we shouldn't underestimate what Toyota do is when you look into the statistics of fuel usage versus speed, lap time, it's just astronomically
I mean, the learning
impressive.
curve is like that, isn't it? I mean, the actual rate of...
We shouldn't underestimate the ability of manufacturers to meet what appear to be incredible targets, and that's what, I don't know what you think, but that's what...
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, yeah, it's cool when you see, like, when they lie down the rules and say, this is what you have to adhere to, and see the rapid rate of development and how quickly they can get there and surpass even what you originally start with is incredible. So, yeah, I mean, I like what you said about the whole field being Garage 56. I mean, it'd be cool if every year you're turning up and you don't know what's in the garage next to you, It'd be so cool. But then, obviously, we're trying to control things in terms of cost and safety, all this stuff. There's so many things now that kind of get in the way a little bit of that. But yeah, it would be so cool if every year, like, you don't see what anyone else has been testing all year, and then you look in the garage next door and think, oh my God,
7 wheels,
and then you're like this, watching the lap times, thinking, oh my God, what are they going to do? I mean,
I think basically back to when you were alluding to Alex, it was Le Mans. The other races, people did them as they felt like, but this is part of the World Endurance Championship, so we do need the vast bulk of the cars to be capable of being raced all year, not just lighting the blue touch paper and hoping it's going to last 24 hours, which, let's face it, for a lot of cars in the 50s and even to an extent the 60s, that still was the case.
Yeah.
But let's just talk about the uniformity. We need cars that can race all around the world. Starting in, I think we ought to just highlight the fact the next championship is starting first weekend in September at Silverstone, but then for the first time in a regular championship, not this current super season, will end at Le Mans. It always seemed wrong, didn't it? That Le Mans was about second round out of 8 or third round out of 8, and the big hurrah, and then it went down. But we seem to have a good format of championship to go out and play. But the uniformity of the teams we have at Le Mans, the drivers we have at Le Mans, it must be safer now, because you don't get people who are coming for their first sports car race, turning up with a briefcase full of cash and hopping in a car in the paddock in a deal done just before qualifying.
That never happened, did it?
Yeah.
No, they said there was cash in the briefcase, but it wasn't. I mean, because obviously we're drawing teams from the European Le Mans Series, Viz, United Autosports, teams to the Asian Le Mans Series. So they're all racing these cars. They're used to the type of cars, the fact it's a 4-class championship, so they're used to having the GT cars alongside them, and cars that race in a similar style in the States. It must be safer these days because of not having someone who could be potentially 10 seconds off their class pace.
And by the time you get to the championship finale, everyone's been racing against each other for the whole season, so they understand who's who, who's in each car and what one to look out for, what ones you're not sure about. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it will make things, this first time round, I think always feels a bit weird being so long and, 2 Le Mans in one. So, But I think, yeah, as it goes on from now into the next season, it'll be pretty normal.
Can I just go back to the last round of the World Championship? Spa-Francorchamps, racing in the snow. Has that added a new string to your bow?
It was insane. Like 4 seasons in 5 minutes. It was incredible. But I don't know. Yeah, I've never seen anything like that before. I saw something the year before, like Nordschleife, just on TV, thinking, "Oh my God, it's snowing down at one half of the track."
Yeah, but that was snow. But
that race this year.
At Spa, you started in bright sunny weather, and rain was predicted within 5 minutes. Then I was commentating on it. I was watching the temperatures go down and down and down. I was thinking, this just isn't very funny. And then the snow, and then through everything else.
But, I know, it's crazy.
But what's your car like when you're? I mean, what's it like
well,
in the rain
it depends
at night?
what tyres you're on. I mean, if you start the lap and for us, it started to rain into turn 1. And I was like, oh, it's going to be a long lap. But luckily, by the time I got to top of Radion, and it was easing off and was dry for the next few corners. So you're gauging it constantly. But because it's fairly spread out track, you end up having one particular corner is bad and the next one's dry. But when we had the hail come down, that's when I was like, I was on wets, but it just felt like I was on marbles. Like, I never felt anything like it before. And then snow, and then, it dried out so fast. It was hard to make the tyre call. I was like, I know it's going to dry, but, is it going to be 1 lap, 4 laps? And, luckily we timed it right. But it was sketchy. If you were out there on slicks and you saw that snow, it was the longest lap of your life.
Yeah, you just felt watching that race that whenever anybody was going to make a call on tyres, they were going to be wrong within 30 seconds or a minute. It was absolutely crazy.
Know,
Right, prototype racers. Let's talk about GTE. GTE, Pro and AM. 2 very different classes, same sort of cars. But we've had news recently, well, in fact, news came through today that Ford is pulling out. BMW we had pulling out. But for years, that has been the sort of kernel of Le Mans. Totally different sort of fans really love it. Real manufacturer to manufacturer battling. Where do you see GTE going?
I think it's always been the class for the type of fan that would head on Twitter and go, I want my race car to look like my road car. I mean, and certainly, there are a big contingent who would go and support Aston Martin and drive their Aston Martin to the Aston Martin race and watch the Aston Martin race and then drive their Aston Martin home. And I think that's really important for the sport because there's an element of the fan base that can't relate to a prototype car. I am not one of that element, but I see its relevance. They are complex race cars in their own right. They do a significant amount of tyre development. They're, in GT Pro, they're proper works teams, and it's massively competitive racing. It would be a real shame to lose it. And I don't know what would go in its place.
I think it will always be a GT class. It's a question of how it's dressed up. It's at its best when we've got, as we've had in recent years, 6 manufacturers, some of them as many as 4 cars each. And over the first few hours of Le Mans, year in, year out, they're nose to tail, bumper to bumper, and the smallest of mishap will drop you.
We have to pass them.
No, I was just about to get to that. What do you do in the opening hours of the race when you've got that many close together and their battle is more important to them than yours?
That's the thing. You try not to trip over each other. And when you're coming up to a bunch, you can see that they're racing. They're not just kind of lapping cars. When you've got like 5 nose to tail, they don't want to give you an inch because they know if they lose that little bit of ground, it's going to be laps before they can catch it back up. So you're trying to, normally they let you know, to be fair. Like the Porsche guys, Ferrari guys, Fords, they'll block you early to say, look, you're going to have to go around me because I'm not going to give up this corner for you, because if they do, they'll lose the time. So normally you figure it out fairly early and you're trying not to be too sneaky and, dive up the inside last minute because he's not going to give up the corner for you. So I think we all kind of know each other by now. I say that still easily though. If you make the wrong tenth of a second decision wrong, going left or right, we know it can go wrong. So, but it normally works out okay. And to be honest, us with the boost button that we have, we can time things quite well. But I know when I raced LMP2, you really had to time it. Oh,
you have to think it through.
Yeah, where's your boost button, Alex?
I think I left it a bit. So under the right foot. It can be tricky in a P2 car because obviously we tend to be racing also amongst ourselves as well. So there's a lot of kind of blocking and balking in the traffic which goes on. You have to time it right. Sometimes you have to be just a little bit forceful. The other thing is, from the GTE guys' point of view, we obviously have an element of amateur drivers in our class, so they don't know who's driving the car, and the absolute last thing they want is for somebody to pass them and then hold them up for 3 corners. It's a real nightmare for them. So if you come up behind them, a quick flash does help. They know that there's somebody who's going to go through, make progress, and get out of their way. But yeah, they also have to know that you are not going to mess about.
So that little element you just talked about there, which could be a very big element, which is 3 drivers in those cars, you don't know which one's in, and there could be a disparity of performance. How much do your crews tell you who's in the car you're approaching over the radio? So at least you have an iota of
Sometimes you get car ahead pro, car ahead am, but you won't. Your engineer's not going to read to you. I don't know, did they do it at Toyota? But my engineer doesn't read to me who's in every single car. We're normally just focused on our own class. You can get a pretty good feel. Le Mans is one of the harder places for this because actually you tend to catch people over a long straight from quite a distance. But when you're on a shorter track, you've usually seen the guy do at least 2 or 3 corners in front of you. And if it's a pro or an am, just from the attitude of the car, it's obvious. So then you can judge how you're going to pass.
Okay, these are all factors that could come into play at Le Mans this year. Mike, to you first, just to wrap up this Royal Automobile Club podcast. Le Mans just around the corner. Toyota Gazoo Racing, 2 cars. We think one of them will win. We don't know. Equivalence of technology is bringing the rest close. What are your thoughts, in a nutshell, going into the race?
We're confident. We've had a good car all year. We know they're going to be closer at Le Mans. They've had, obviously, 14 months of development since when they first came. So we expect them to be closer than last year for sure. But I think as long as we do our job, we should be able to hopefully another 1-2 finish and hopefully car 7 in front.
Let's see. It's a number that's won before. Alex, a real melting pot. Loads of Orecas, 10 Orecas, one as an Alpine, one as an Urus, and 6 Ligiers. So not a lot of difference in there. So how are you going to find the small elements that can propel you to the front?
It's going to be rough. There's going to be no mistakes, that's for sure. We're more prepared than we look from the late entry. And as Mike says, the element of execution of all the things that have to be done correctly doesn't change no matter what you're racing. So same difference for us.
Well, Mike, Alex, best of luck. So that's a wrap. The pre-Le Mans podcast, the Royal Automobile Club. We're really looking forward to the event. 4 classes. We have no idea who's going to win, and that's why we love it. Join us next time.